what opposition wants is recidivists to engage with societies. We want a better rehabilitation system in which we think, ladies and gentlemen, their proposals are not going to solve these kinds of issues. We defend status quo. What is status quo, gentlemen? Within the current status quo, they say that we lack programs. Then we think we can add programs if that is the problem that they want to ask. So we think we can have more rehabilitation programs, such as giving them classes or giving them enough training to make them better. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. But secondly, we still are going to give them punishment if they do recidivism again. So we think if deterrence what they want, deterrence still exists right now. They must give a comparative. Why both of these things are not existing and why they are lacking at the very least. As LO, ladies and gentlemen, I'll prove two major things. One, I'm going to talk about responsibility, where it ends. Second, I'm going to talk about re-evaluation of societies that exist in the current status quo. All of my responses will be integrated in my arguments. One, let's talk about responsibility. I think states' responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, are not going to continue in which they side, ladies and gentlemen, have to be continued in this side, ladies and gentlemen. There are two main issues I want to talk about. One, I'm going to talk about law are not retroactive, and second, I'm going to talk about responsibility of rehabilitation. One, let's talk about law and retroactiveness. I think, ladies and gentlemen, crimes that happen in the past and crimes that happen in the future cannot be adjudicated in one single instances and used as a parameter for future cases. In this instance, ladies and gentlemen, I think that in future crimes, you are saying that the past adjudication are wrong. I think that is false because you do not take into account what are the parameters in those gap between the very first issue and the second issue, in which we think, ladies and gentlemen, like what Prime Minister said, there are so many external factors that contributes towards in that gap. So I think if they want to neglect that gap, then you are actually not adjudicating the cases holistically, ladies and gentlemen. So I think law should not be adjudicated only in one instant. Other instances that are not filed, you must adjudicate it holistically. But secondly, let's talk about responsibility of rehabilitation, ladies and gentlemen. I think that rehabilitation in the current status quo only comes to the extent where they are in jail, gentlemen, because it is these things that are being determined by the court. We think in the current status quo, our responsibility is to give our best towards the societies that have been in jail. We give them classes, we give them training, ladies and gentlemen. We have never been given the responsibility to make sure that they are going to change 100%, ladies and gentlemen. Because assuming these people are human, ladies and gentlemen, then you must take into account the emotions and what are the calculus that happens in the current status quo. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that the people, how they decide in the current status quo are not because the failures of government. In two layers of analysis. One, I think these kinds of things are not responsibility of government because of the responsibility of the culture of the individual people, ladies and gentlemen. I think in the current status quo, PM rightly said that most of the cases happens in the current status quo because of the amplification of cultures of criminality, in which, ladies and gentlemen, I think in the current status quo, the fault of that culture, in which, ladies and gentlemen, I think government is falsely assuming that culture because government's failure. I think that culture are being constructed by the society. Society makes the culture that these are criminals. These people are actually the societies that are engaging with criminal acts. I think, ladies and gentlemen, the construction of that culture are not the hands of the government, but the society itself. If you want to give every burden towards government, I think that's an unfair education because you have to balance the contribution towards those kinds of acts, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, I think these kinds of individuals do these kinds of things not because of government, but because of their individual interests, ladies and gentlemen, in two major scenarios. I think, ladies and gentlemen, most recidivists do these kinds of crimes again because of two major contexts. One, because economical reason, ladies and gentlemen. I think most recidivists are desperate because they are unable to get jobs, because they are being afraid to be recruited to get jobs, ladies and gentlemen. I think because of that disparity in their context, ladies and gentlemen, leads them to do, again, a crime, ladies and gentlemen. I think this adjudication and calculus cannot be in the extent of government to respond that, ladies and gentlemen. Because I think government already give them the helps, such as the helps to get trainings. If in this context they have already decided through calculus that this is not working, that I must do something in alternative, then that is their calculus itself, ladies and gentlemen. Because in the current status quo, some people actually succeeded It shows that some people do not have the calculus to do this. Some people condone on doing this. This shows that this is agency of individuals and not the faults of other government. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, other from economical reasons, it's also about emotional retaliation, ladies and gentlemen. Because you have to understand, some people that get into jail might feel angry that maybe I have a friend that is actually making this happens to me, ladies and gentlemen. I think this emotional disparity and this emotional something that they hold inside are actually can make their calculus after going out of jail to be the calculus on them by saying, I want to do this and I want to kill you. In which I think, ladies and gentlemen, government cannot take into account because sometimes emotional disparity can be hidden when they are being rehabilitated. So I think in those kinds of cases, emotional calculus cannot be taken into account by government. So I think retaliation will still happen. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I think responsibility cannot be extended to government because this is the individual agency and individual decisions upon what is best for them. In which, ladies and gentlemen, it is not going to happen in their side. Secondly, let's talk about evaluation, ladies and gentlemen, because this is mostly what May says in her argument. She says that in the current status quo, rehabilitation will be better because society will feel aware upon what is happening in the current status quo and they will accept them better. I think, ladies and gentlemen, her logic is false because this assumes that culture are being constructed by the government, ladies and gentlemen. I think they have to prove why if government are giving compensation, then the culture will change itself, ladies and gentlemen. I will show to you my argument why that culture will change. I think, ladies and gentlemen, in current status quo, how does society evaluate themselves? I think in the current status quo, society evaluate themselves by saying that in the current status quo, the government are not at fault. Maybe there are other external factors that contributes to that. Then they evaluate, or maybe our culture is at wrong. That's why in the current status quo, most policies are changing. That's why most corporates are being limited to, are being engaged and are being pressured to accept recidivism people because they are already aware that these individuals are not constructed by the government, are not fault of the government, but because of the society's culture that pressure them to do these kinds of crimes, ladies and gentlemen. So I think they have better evaluation when the narrative is, this is your fault, not because of the government. In comparative, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you give compensation, guess what is the narrative? It shows that government are at fault. This will mean that society will say, oh, it's the government fault. This is not about our culture. Government should evaluate themselves again. In these cases, ladies and gentlemen, the structural problem that makes individuals do crimes will not be changed because in government, most of the time, how they do rehabilitation, ladies and gentlemen, is already at their full extent, which is they have given trainings, they have given so many classes and given fundings. So we think, ladies and gentlemen, what you must do are not change the government, but change all of the system in which they never reason in their argument, ladies and gentlemen. In our side, it's much fairer because if it's not the government faults, in our side, you have better rehabilitation program. Vote for team opposition.